All right, welcome back to Servant Leadership Library, where we explore the stories and strategies behind leaders who don't just build businesses, they build people, communities, and sometimes entire industries. I'm your host, Nicholas Paulukow, CEO of One to One, your managed IT and cybersecurity firm that keeps your tech running smoother than a perfectly tuned HVAC system. See what I did there? Today, we're cracking open a particularly cooler chapter, pun absolutely intended. Joining us is David McIIwaine, the founder and president of HVAC Distributors, a company he launched all the way back in 1987. While some of us, like me, were still figuring out our locker combinations, David was already building what became a powerhouse wholesaler, distributor, and manufacturer's rep, supplying residential and light commercial heating and air conditioning equipment across the region. But David isn't just moving product. He's been shaping the industry itself. He served as chairman of the board of North American Technician Excellence from 2016 to 2017. So yes, he doesn't just know HVAC, he helps set the standards for it. When the industry asks, is this excellent? David often knows the answer. So today we're diving into 3 decades of leadership in technical, evolving, high-stakes industry, teaching you about vision, people, and staying cool under pressure. Again, pun intended. I can't help myself. So grab your notepad, tune your thermostat to inspired, and get ready for a conversation that might just raise your leadership IQ a few degrees in the best way. So, hey, Dave, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate your time today. And can you tell the group a little bit more about you? I know a lot about you, but what an amazing intro. Since 1987.
Yeah, it just says I'm old, but
we call it a seasoned professional, Dave.
yeah, that's true. Um, so grew up in Millersville. My father was a professor there. He spent over. Well, we came here in I think it was the spring of 1958, and so he was at Millersville from then, and then after he retired he was probably close in his late 70s when he retired, and then
Wow.
he stayed on the board of trustees, and you'll appreciate this story. He's in his mid 80s and he's on the board of trustees, and they decided that at that point they were going to go all electronic, and they gave my dad an iPad. Well,
Wow.
I think that ended up being some administrative person's job at Millersville. Was her full-time task was to help my dad with his iPad. But he embraced it and did it. And so anyway, grew up in Millersville. Had the hope that I was going to play college football,
Oh,
and
boy.
so spent a year at a prep school doing a gap year, called Wyoming Seminary up in Kingston outside Wilkes-Barre,
Okay.
and it never panned out. When they got ready to time me for the 100, they'd roll out the sundial, and so
Dang
uh,
it.
so with that speed, uh, it wasn't going to work. So um, at I went to Bloomsburg and played 1 year there,
Okay.
and then it became painfully obvious that it wasn't meant to be. And so then got interested in um, played intramural sports, reffed basketball, um, and got involved in student government, and found other ways to kind of do things.
Yeah.
So the 4 summers while I was going to Bloom, I went to work for a company called Hajoka. Literally, they were Fleck Marshall Corp. Uh, and you talk about small world and coincidences. The property where Rhodes Energy is now was the original Fleck Marshall property, and then was purchased by Hajoka. So for 3 summers of my life, I worked there. And where the Springhouse Brewing was one of the warehouses, where we used to, where material was stored,
Oh,
that I'd have to
really?
load trucks. And then in around 74, 1970, no, excuse me, 1979, they moved out to Fruitville Pike where they still are
Oh,
today.
okay.
So I spent 7.5 years with them, and we were chatting earlier, and we were talking about the belief that some people have that they need um, to get work in whatever they went to college
Oh,
for.
for it. Yeah.
Well, I went to school and got a general management degree, and again, as people who know me would say, I'm a little off. I made accounting my they didn't give dual degrees, but I took enough electives in accounting um,
Mm,
that with one or two more courses, I could have had enough to satisfy the accounting major. And I had roommates at the house I shared at college, and they thought I was nuts. Why would you take accounting as a major? But I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur,
really?
and
Okay.
and I always or I believed that if you knew the numbers,
Mm.
then you were going to be in a much better position than somebody who didn't know the numbers.
Ah,
so
that's
i'm
fair.
so i'm going to school learning about business management and accounting, and I'm working for this plumbing and heating distributor during the summer, and they offered me a position to come in and basically start and lead a heating department for them.
Okay.
And part of the deal was they would send me 2 afternoons a week to study with a retired engineer, and I would learn
Really?
the stuff I had no idea, of how to do. And his name was Bob Axe, great guy. I mean, just that guy could solve an equation on his slide rule faster than I could on a calculator. I mean,
Really?
it was just phenomenal, what he
Just in
could
his
do.
head.
Just zoom, 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 with the slide rule, and boom, he'd have it. Um, and a lot of people will probably have to Google what is a slide rule,
Slide
right?
rule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so anyway, when they offered me the job, and I thought, well, listen, if they're gonna send me, to study and learn, I'm gonna have a skill that's transferable, and then I'll be able to do whatever I want with. And it worked out. It just really worked out well. I spent 7.5 years there. For about 3.5 of the years, I commuted to Drexel in the evening and got an MBA.
Really? Wow.
And and it was interesting because at Drexel, there was kids there had gone to Penn, had gone to
Right.
Delaware, gone to whatever, St. Joe's,
Yep.
all kind. And I never felt like that state school education I got from Bloomsburg University, that I was at any kind of disadvantage,
Right. Right.
to people there, which just goes to show, depending on what you're going for, you should be a good steward of your money, and figure out how much do you really have to spend for that education.
Well, hey, the bigger question is why didn't you go to Millersville for that? Is it didn't have what you were looking for?
Nick, Nick, you think I wanted to be there with my parents
With
for
you?
4 years? No, I
Yeah,
had to
I
get
thought
out
I
of
just throw it
Dodge.
out there.
I had to get out of Dodge, because I could tell you there was a number of times when, I'd be home from school, or I'd be whatever. And when I did a short stint living at home after college, I'd hear my mom on the phone. Yes, we're having issues with David again. So, so no, it was good that
Get
Dave got
out.
out of town.
Uh,
Um, but my younger brother went to Millersville, actually, but and my older sister got a master's in teaching there.
wow.
Um,
Okay.
but yeah, of course, my dad, believed that the state schools were, depending which one and for what you were going for, were as competitive as anywhere. And so we covered them all. My sister went to Shippensburg, then masters at
Wow.
Millersville. I went to Bloomsburg, masters at Drexel. My younger sister went to Slippery Rock, and then got a library science degree down in Georgia,
Wow.
somewhere after that. And then, of course, my brother went to Millersville, then got a PhD at Brown, and did a postdoc at Johns Hopkins.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So,
Overachiever there.
so
But one thing that's pretty interesting that you said about like education, right? Like, I mean, you were educated and you got your degrees, but like that entrepreneurial spirit was already existing prior to that education. Like, where did that come from? Like, what? I mean, you know, what got that fire started? Where'd you see that from?
I think I was just, I was always one of those kids that was motivated, and
Okay.
I was cutting grass at 10 or 11, had a paper route, for a couple of years.
Man
Worked
after
at
my own heart.
John Herr's grocery store, as
Okay.
a clerk putting, stocking shelves, bagging groceries. So I think it's just, I think it's just something that's a drive. And I honestly believe that that education beyond high school is more about learning how to learn
Mm.
and learning kind of who you are and what you like and whatever than it is of having to get, narrowed into some particular path.
Uh, that's well said. I mean, learning how to learn, right? Like we look today, and I think just talking to my kids that are in school, like everything is like an individual task, right? Like do this work. But the reality is when we get to work, we tell everybody to work together, right? And they're like, well, what do you mean? Like we weren't taught that unless we were in sports, right? So I
Yeah.
sometimes feel like it's a bit of an interesting system of like we were taught to like be smart and pass the test, but in
Yeah.
reality, when I was a kid, I was like, well, if there's a simpler way to solve this problem, why can't we work it out? And, I found when I got into business, that was similar, right? Like the more that
Yeah.
you get other people in the common area. Well, you went through like the 7 years with Hojoka, and then you just what branched out on your own, or how did that happen?
Yeah. So, Hojoka, great company, and they've really grown dramatically in the years since I left. But it just didn't feel like the right fit for me because I was about um customer service and market share
Okay.
and growth, and they were very at least at that time very financially driven,
Mm.
um and not so much those other things. So I just didn't feel like it was the right long-term look. And I tell people, I when I graduated Drexel, I put my resume out and gave it about 30 nanoseconds, and when I didn't get the big offer that I wanted, um, I decided that I had spent, those years building relationships and really significantly growing the business, and that I could go do that for myself. And so, actually, a friend of mine said called me one day. He said, "Hey, if you're thinking about doing your own thing, you need to get up to Mount Joy and look at this building that's for sale. It's been sitting there for a
Really?
while." And um so I went up to Mount Joy, and there was this 60 some thousand square foot warehouse sitting empty that Lancaster Leaf Tobacco had
Okay.
vacated, pretty much a year prior, and consolidated their operations down near Costco. And so I'm looking around, and I'm looking at what they're asking, and it was that typical don't wanter, right? Where the real estate, there's weeds growing up. It was
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
what it was there was still tobacco dust and dirt and stuff, all over the place. And so, I didn't, I was 29 years old, and but I could do math, and and
Yeah,
and I
that
think
accounting degree there.
and I figured out that I could rent the space for $2 a square foot and cover the mortgage.
Wow.
So I said, and of course nothing's, no risk, but I thought it was low risk.
Right.
And so then, I got my dad and his friend Gib Armstrong, who,
Oh yeah.
Gib was a state house, then state
Yeah.
senate, and so I knew, Gib had the connections, and he had an entrepreneurial spirit, and so
Yeah.
he had other things he was involved with, and so the three of us, buy this property. And in the beginning I rented most of it out, because we were just getting to start in a small space, but funny, kind of not funny at the time, but funny story. Like when we would go up and we're checking out the building, there was a roofing company there, doing some work, and so I thought, well, it'd probably be a good idea to get a statement of the condition of the roof, right? So so I make the mistake of going to that roofer, and weeks are going by and we're getting close to settlement and I'm not getting this letter. And then finally I think Gib, called or did something, or put the pressure on, but we get this letter, and long story short says, roof is in fine shape and with a good maintenance program will give you years of service. However, this is no guarantee, right? So we settle, we buy the building. It's not a week or two later, it rains and the roof leaks like a sieve in a bunch of places. so, so, so I go back to the roofer and I said,
that maintenance plan.
I said, dude, what's going on? He said, Dave, we were told that if we didn't give you that letter, that we wouldn't do any more work for those people. And I said, well, yeah, okay. So anyway, so we buy the building, and we end up having to put $250,000 into a re-roofing project. So that wasn't in the budget. So you're talking about a little adversity, but so you do stuff. Along with the property came a duplex house. We sold off the duplex house. There was all kinds of air compressors and stuff. There was these huge steam boilers. I found a guy to buy them. We sold that stuff off, and we just, we poured the money back into the roof. But that, ironically, that situation happened again to us when we ended up buying. It was a little mini market and frozen food lockers. Now, this is going to really rock the world of some of your listeners. In 1992, I think it was, when we purchased Wenger's Market, there was still people paying for their frozen food locker, which,
really,
I mean, 50 years ago, right? Downtown Lancaster was full of frozen food places because people couldn't afford, refrigerators with freezers in their homes, right? So you outsourced it. Well, when we purchased that building, they had to refund money to some people that still were paying for those frozen food lockers.
Right.
But anyway, the story, the correlation to the roof story is that 1 week to the day after we settled on the market, and let me tell you that we really didn't want it, need it, or whatever, but we bought it because if they were going to put it up for sale, it was like it could have negatively impacted on our property depending who bought it. 1 week to the day after we settled, the roof collapsed.
No way.
Because the ice, for 60 years or whatever, was holding up the roof over the frozen food lockers. So I'll never forget that phone call to my dad and Gib. Hey, remember that building that we just bought that we really didn't want, but we thought we better buy it? Well, the roof just collapsed, and I just got a price. It's $40,000 for demo.
Oh my.
Yeah. So
you almost would have been better off buying a roofing company.
You got that right.
I mean, we talk about like entrepreneurs and like business owners, and I mean, you're talking going from like working a full-time job where you have steady income to like this big risk, right? And I think a lot of people see like this top of the iceberg concept, right? Like where people are at after success, right? But I mean, it doesn't sound like you were driving, or maybe that's a question, like, right, there was passion, there was energy. This wasn't like a money grab, right? Like it wasn't like, right? Like I know for myself, I went from a 6-figure job to making 18 grand for the first year and still wonder today, is this worth it? Now that's kidding, but it's not, it doesn't seem like, and maybe your same journey. This wasn't like an immediate, this was a vision, right? Like, and a passion. And like, tell tell everybody like how do you take that vision and passion? I mean, you were selling that to Gib and your dad, and I mean that takes a lot of trust in you to be able to do that. Like, how did you start to build? I mean, like your business seems to be like one that requires a lot of capital, right? So like, how did you start this up then, and start generating revenue from it?
Yeah. So, um, I had saved money. I was doing well at Hajoke, and I had saved money,
Okay.
but certainly not, not enough to, to fund everything. And so, knew I needed, bank support.
Okay.
And, the MBA, taught me about business plans and that kind
Mm.
of stuff. So I put a business plan together. And, and I think back on this stuff, and when I say it, I think, oh my God, how naive was I? But I put together this big, binder with a business plan, put it all together, and then um, Gib had connections at Fulton Bank, and to this day I still do business with Steve Stamen. Well, he was the guy Rufus Fulton assigned,
Really?
to figure out what these guys are doing. And so I put the business plan together, give it to Steve, and he's asking me all these questions, and I'm like, well, I mean, it's all in the plan, Steve. Aren't you just going to loan me the money? And I was so I think there's an aspect to um, entrepreneurs of where a little bit of being naive,
Yes.
combined with being, aggressive and confident works to your advantage, because you
Yeah.
take risks and do things that, you know, most people would say, well, heck no, that doesn't make any sense, right?
Like how did you navigate that too, like moving through that, right? And then as you've matured in your business and you're more educated, did you find it was harder to take risks because you knew more? Like I kind of use this expression of like we were kind of young and dumb, right? Like, and dumb from like
Yes.
risk taker, right? Like we
Sure.
were learning. Did you feel that you became less risky as you became more educated?
Um, I didn't, but I think I did a better job of assessing the risk
Ah,
and
okay.
knowing what the risk was. But in the early days, like you said, I mean, I took a 60%, pay cut, and put it all on the line, including my house and,
Yeah.
and everything. And but I always felt like, knowing what I can do, I can get a job,
Yeah.
right? So
Love it.
so it was just more of a, you just have to grind.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things when you look at people that have become successful, they have grit.
Yeah.
And it can be, our best salespeople, have grit. Our it They just do. They can overcome adversity and just keep going. And um I think I was a beneficiary of my parents, um, that I won the DNA pool for grit.
Oh,
Because they both, I mean, my dad, he memorized the eye chart, Nick, in order to pass the
no
physical
way.
to go to World War II.
No way.
Yeah, because he had buddies that were going, and he had a job at a machine shop that, was making parts for the military, so he could have been deferred, but he felt like he wasn't doing his part, and he memorized the eye chart so he could pass the eye test. And he served with Patton's Fifth Army, and
Really?
he landed like D-Day plus 10 days,
Really?
and was there through the entire war.
Unbelievable.
And my mom, had lots of physical issues, and never ever let them hold them back. So, I was blessed.
Oh, that's amazing. And Dave, as you talk about like, it's a little different, right? Like you're building this thing from the ground up.
Mhm.
what were you say like as you matured the business, what were like some of the main big challenges or hurdles or like curve jumps that you felt you had to overcome?
Um, I think that the the big the biggest challenge is when you're growing that business, and you know this, and you're there, you have your arms around it, you're controlling everything. When you start growing to the point where you have to have people responsible and managing other people. And I'm telling you, um that was a hit and miss for me, because they don't
Okay.
teach you that kind of stuff in school,
Right.
and I would say that a lot of the really impactful learnings that I had came after school, even after the MBA.
Right.
Like they give you like technical stuff and things like that, but how to lead people, and how to communicate, how to just how to get everybody around. Now, and you made the mention earlier when we were talking about sports. I loved sports, played basketball, played football, loved that whole thing. And and that that getting everyone to pull together, right,
Yeah.
for a common goal. And so we love hiring athletes, right,
Yeah.
because they understand that and they get that.
Yeah.
Um, I, and you
And
had asked
they
earlier
get the
about,
word no too, right? Like they get the you're not the best, like you got to work. They see that's goes back to your comment of grit, right? It's like if they're
yeah,
willing to stand back up and do it again, right?
yep,
Yeah.
that's absolutely it. It was Gib Armstrong had a guy that he invested in his business. He had a they sold materials to road paving companies. His name was Rennie DiLoretto. And
Ooh.
this was back even when this was back when I was at Hajoka, and Gib got me to go to Rennie. Rennie had a sales class called "I'm a Tiger." That was the name, was the "I'm a Tiger" sales class. Anyway, never forget it. And and so we would go on Saturdays. It was all day, and Rennie was just the consummate sales guy. He was unbelievable. And but they would give us an assignment, and then you'd go back the next week, and then
Oh,
try
that's neat.
and sell somebody, whatever, accomplish something, and then you come back the next week. Well, my assignment was to go get it was at that time HM Stauffer and Sons. I was trying to get them, I don't know, to buy oil furnaces from us.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so and so and so I go back the next Saturday, and so Rennie, calls me up to the front of the room, and we're, having the debrief. And he goes, "So Dave, did you get the sale?" I said, "No, no, no, Rennie." I said, but and I started to explain why I didn't get it. And Rennie just looked at me and let me, ramble on. He said, "So what I hear you saying is you just weren't good enough." And I said, "Oh, no, 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 no. It's this and this." And I was giving him, all these reasons, right? He says, "Dave, you just weren't good enough." And it took 3 times.
No way.
And then and Gib was actually at that class. He said, "Dave, your face lit up and you got it. That sales is competition. Sales is like sports,
It's
and
like winning.
sales is fighting to win."
Yeah.
And honestly, that lit the switch for me on on connecting, the whole sales process to winning and success. And so then I learned that, developed that, used that. And then, you know, when you're trying to fund a business, a lot of times the bankers are lending based on character,
Right.
because they know that stuff's going to go wrong. They know it. I
Right.
was so naive to think, well, I mean, I put this business plan together, says everything's going
It's
to
gonna
be
go
wonderful.
exactly.
And in 3 years, we're going to be making so much money. You guys are going to be so lucky to be our bank. And, and they knew they know stuff goes wrong, right? Because that's
Yeah.
what they do. But if they believe in the owner, or
Yeah.
the leaders of the who they're loaning money to, then you that makes all the difference. And so
Yeah. You're
my
absolutely right.
my knowing the numbers, and my just unwillingness to fail is what, allowed us
It's the
to
grit.
get through. And not like there weren't lots of ups and downs, but
Yeah. That's amazing. And I think that's like a difference talking to, I can relate, right? I mean, you're way ahead of where I'm at in certain circumstances, but it's like that grit kind of like just pushes you and drives you and it's like seasons, right? Like there's always some other, it never seems like it ever levels out. But
mm,
I think the entrepreneurial spirit is always like it's never good enough. Like there's always
absolutely.
another thing to tweak. And I think that's kind of my worst enemy sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Because if I don't surround, and that's kind of back to a question of like your drive and your passion and your energy and your motivation when you were building a team. I mean, obviously you were hiring people to work with you and for you, but how did you navigate like your passion and maybe they didn't have the same passion, like they were doing like a job? How did you go through that journey? Um, or did you just hit the leadership lotto, you know? Um,
No, certainly didn't do that. I made lots of mistakes. I mean, just lots of mistakes. In and I would say, the biggest, most expensive mistakes I've ever made were all around people
okay.
and the selection of people and the wrong people. And so, but I recognized that I had to get better at it, right? And so started reading, took different seminars, on
Right.
hiring and stuff like that. And and then I also found that you have to you have to allow people to fail. What you have to do though is try and control the magnitude of the failure, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you can't allow it to be catastrophic. And um and I also learned, and with the whole requisite organization and Elliot Jock
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, there's a lot of controversial stuff, but there's some stuff of his that is just so um uh clear that and makes so much sense. And one of my favorites that I learned a long time ago was the whole thing about task assignments and QQTR, right? With the what by when. And
Mm,
QQTR is quality, quantity, timeliness, and resources.
mm,
And 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 in a lot of cases, when we ask someone to do something, we said, "Hey, can you do that report for me? And yeah, get it back to me as soon as you can." Right? And so you've given them no context,
yep.
and you may have a very high sense of urgency that says, I want that thing this afternoon, right? And their sense of urgency is much less, so they figure if they get it to you by the end of the week, right? And that's what creates
Clarity.
the conflict and the disconnects.
Mm,
So I think when I learned that you need clarity,
mm,
and with clarity comes accountability,
mm,
and the ability to hold someone accountable, it changed everything.
mm. That's well said. And I know what I create. I took that document, that process. I have it as a draft in my email. So I can copy and paste that reminds me every time. And it's a valid point because you're right, right? There's so much of we're not clear in our communication. And potentially when we move at such a brisk pace, we don't set the right expectation and frustration ensues. That's excellent feedback. That adds a great reminder too, because I guess it doesn't matter what size you're at. You can't grow unless you can properly delegate clearly to someone for them to own it. And without that clarity, you can't really hand it off.
Right. And how do you hold them accountable to your
Right.
expectations if you don't clearly communicate what you expect?
Ah,
But it's so simple, Nick. That's what's so
it's
frustrating to
always
me
simple
about
things,
stuff.
right?
It's always that stuff. Over the years at Vistage, I've been truly amazed at the speakers that are able to take these complex things and boil them down to one side of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and it's brilliant.
Yeah. I know my personality, and my personality likes to complicate things. So I always need someone that can bring clarity. And I know we all do assessments, but we call it the philosopher and culture index. The philosopher can take what I pegged is I realized learning more is that our hired guns, a lot of them are philosophers, which I was like, that's very interesting. And I studied more on that and I realized, oh, wait, they're reporting to a board and they're reporting to their constituents, which is way different than an entrepreneur that's kind of like starting off with muscle and feel
Yeah.
and complicating things. So that was just a aha moment for me.
Well, something else that you mentioned, as entrepreneurs is right. We're always looking for the next thing and always striving and whatever. So one of the things that I also learned is that I needed to make sure that I had, as part of my executive group, a cheerleader, because I don't sell, I'm just not a person that celebrates stuff, right? I'm
Yeah.
just, okay, yeah, that's great, we did that, now let's go get the next, now
Uh,
let's go get the next. But that's exhausting
it
to
is
you,
exhausting.
to your people, and it also can be demoralizing. We worked so hard, we did this was the goal, and we accomplished it, and boy, we don't even talk about it. Now we have this next goal, right?
Uh,
So I think it's important for leaders to remember that if you're going to set goals and push people, that you have to then take the time to celebrate them, and thank them, right? That you've gotten there.
how did you solve for that, Dave? Like who's your cheerleader in your organization now? Like what's the role?
My director of HR.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, but before we were that big, um, I had an admin person, and at one point I had a salesperson, that was just there, and so, and I gave them permission. I said, listen, I am, charging ahead, and if you think that I'm missing something, you need to speak up and tell me.
You know what? I just got master classed right there on that one because working on a problem today. So Dave, thank you. I'll pay you for your master class later. That was my similar personality of driving their goals is that cheerleader is like, well, that was good. Let's do the next one. And where I'm at the current moment, I'm always dipping down to try to be the cheerleader, but it just and I can rile everyone up. It just doesn't make me feel good.
No.
Like I just want to, and I'm missing that. That's probably why there's this like ups and downs. There is
Yeah.
because my other leaders are drivers too,
Hmm.
and good
Yeah.
master class there, Dave.
You need to find your person that's the person that has empathy and can read the room and know that the organization needs a celebration.
Uh, we had to make it at a point that we actually had a pause to celebrate, to reflect. Isn't that ridiculous? I mean, it
Mhm.
sounds so stupid to say it out loud. We're like, all right, it's gonna be our monthly meeting. What did we have to pause and remember we have to celebrate? And that sounds so stupid when I say it out loud. It's like, all right, Nick. But like someone that isn't in that mode, like I find it fascinating to pay attention to like entrepreneurs and then those that are fascinated that can kind of come in and run an organization and then ones that are generational. We're all quite different. And I found that we can't really put each of us in similar boxes. So, I mean, we have similar problems, but you just identified like an entrepreneurial spirit has a whole different level potentially of leadership around them than maybe another. Would you agree with that or
Oh
would
yeah.
you? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you have to be very, very deliberate in your selection of people,
Mm,
and I've hired people that were very competent people and very capable, but you know what, the culture, it wasn't a good culture fit.
mm,
And and so we've had those conversations over the years about requisite and strata and all that kind of stuff. Well, I'm telling you, you can have someone that's a high strata, but if it's not the right culture fit, it doesn't
right.
matter.
Uh, Well, and like, what advice would you give leaders who want like to build a business that lasts for decades? I mean, you've been doing that, right? Like, what are the key things that keep, that business of yours lasting over and over? Because there's not many businesses that last to the tenure that yours has. I mean, kudos to you, by the way.
Thank you. Um, and again, it's every day's a work in process. I really believe, Nick, that it's around clarity, and 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 it seems so simplistic, but I really believe that it starts with a clear job description. Of course, in requisite, they call them role specification forms,
Yes.
because that's what it does. It specifies the accountabilities so that people know what they're accountable for. And by having that clarity of knowing what every position is supposed to be doing, and it has to be a living, breathing process so that you update them, because they change. And it'll, it drives you crazy, because you say, okay, I want you to look over this RSF and tell me, what are you doing that's not on it, and what aren't you doing that's on it? And sometimes they're not doing stuff that they should be doing.
Right.
But if you don't ask that question, you don't know.
Right.
And so, because once you have that role spec, then you can start selecting people for the role, and you select them by saying, okay, so this is an accountability for this position. And you can connect it to a behavior, and then you interview for the behavior, right? Because people, unfortunately, lie in the interview, and say they've done things and do stuff. And when you have behavior based questions that say, tell me about a time when you did this, who did you work with, how long did it take, what problems did you come up with, who did you go to for help when you needed help. And when you have that kind of dialogue with an applicant, people can make stuff up, but they can't make stuff up like it when they get through that. And that was a great example. Could you give me another one? You know what I mean? They just, unless they're diabolical, and then you're not going to catch it anyway. So I think the piece is, it's about people, and you got to get right people, right seats, right? And then the book First Break All the Rules, which is the Gallup organization book. I know we've talked about that. It's got the 10 stages of getting from base camp to Everest, and all those questions. And so we try and use those to be able to get an affirmative answer to those questions with our folks, either through the one-to-ones, the quarterly one-to-ones, the annual appraisals, and the way we design our onboarding system when we hire new people. Every person pretty much that we hire in our organization goes through a 1-week onboarding, where it's completely scripted. They have an onboarding manual. Every minute of the day is scripted. Somebody takes them to lunch every day to try and make sure at the end of that week they understand their job. They understand how their job interacts with as many as a half a dozen other people, and they know who to go to for help if they have an issue, because they've met with them. They maybe had lunch with them.
Right. They're creating relationships and everything.
And one of the questions on that Gallup on the First Break All the Rules is, I have a friend at work. And so we try and put them in front of so many people that they make a connection. And maybe they like golfing, or maybe they like hunting, or maybe they like dirt track rate, whatever it is, but they find somebody in the organization that shares a common interest with them, so they feel a connection, right? Because it's really hard for people to start a new job, right? Because they're apprehensive. Did I make the right choice? And is the culture going to be what's going to make me happy? And, am I going to like it there? So we try and answer as many of those questions as we can in that first week to try and get people settled in.
Yeah, I like that. And I think what I'm hearing is like, I mean, people obviously drive the business and scale the business, but I mean, if they're not all moving in the same direction and they're confused, we're doing is just slowing down any production, or we could be losing key people out of
Yes.
frustration because there isn't any clarity. And I think what I heard from you too is there's probably so many of us that fail to do that part. It becomes like a task, not a system.
Yes.
And it becomes just I mean, the amount of dollars spent to onboard and train and hire someone is enormous. And there's no way you're going to scale if you can't, just like keeping a client, you got to keep the right people in the right seats. I think that's excellent feedback.
And people don't leave companies, they leave their manager.
Mm,
And so if you aren't doing an effective job with that manager, in developing and coaching and whatever their
right.
people, and unfortunately we've lost good people over the years until I kind of figured out, what that formula needed to be.
Well, and you talk about the people, like how do you invest in your people that they feel like value, capable, part of the bigger picture, right? I mean, you're a way bigger organization than when you first started, right? So like
Yes.
how do you communicate that message? How do you reward them? How do you make them feel like they're part of that team that they learned about the first day, the first week that they were there?
So we've always been very transparent. We've always been open book about, how the company's doing and what what was our goal? What did we accomplish? We do that every other month. Uh we are very transparent about here's the goals we set, here's how we're doing against them. And we honestly, Nick, when I started the company and I started hiring people, I thought, I'm going to treat people the way I would want to be treated.
Mhm.
And I don't, I wouldn't be happy at a company where they treat me, like they don't trust me
Right.
and treat me like I can't be, given that information. It's funny. One time we had a truck driver who a competitor was trying to take, and um he didn't go, and so his manager said, well, why'd you stay? He says, I don't understand all the stuff Dave tells us, when we have those meetings and all that. He said, but the fact that he trusts me enough to try and share and tell me is
Ah,
I trust him.
oh, that's key. Trust. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is amazing, and how you're able to do that with continued scale, right? I mean, I think it's just like human behavior, you're saying. Like just be good, be open, be honest to what you're capable of doing, and it creates a level of trust and community around those behaviors.
Yeah,
Um,
and you also have to, as your organization expands and you have more layers, and now you've got distributed facilities. We go from Chantilly, Virginia to Buffalo, New York. I mean,
wow.
there's big geographic scope. I mean, there's certainly people, that we know that'll listen to this that have national or international
Right.
settings, but what I've also found is that everyone needs to continuous development and mentoring, which is why those one-to-ones are so important.
Mhm.
And then we were looking at some of the employee feedback from the best places to work survey, and we're like, oh my gosh, in some areas we're doing a terrible job, with these people. So then we started scripting the managers and being more formal about coaching the managers on leadership and how to talk to, because you know as you get lower in the organization, you have these more frontline managers that are like, well, listen, I told them what to do. Why do I have to be coaching them? I said, there's NFL players that are paid $40 million a year, and they have a position coach, an offensive coach, a head coach.
Yeah.
I said, if they make 40 million a year and still need multiple coaches, why do you think you don't need to coach your person?
Ah, I love that analogy too. Yeah, and it's just kind of simple. There's 5 levels of leadership, right? The book is written, and the number
Mhm.
one is when you take on leadership, and you think like by telling someone to do it, they just listen because you have a title, right? They go,
Right.
that's not leadership, right? They're following you out of fear. They're not following you because they trust you.
Right.
Yeah. Now, Dave, as you have moved in your career, like how do you stay grounded? Like as you continue to build this business and go through the ups and downs, like how do you ground yourself? I'm sure it's not all it's seemingly lonely at the top sometimes. Like how do you ground yourself?
Um, well, I mean, I've been a Vistage member for 38 years or 34 years. 34 years. I just tell people I'm a slow learner, so I have to keep I have to keep
There's
at
that
it. So
mentorship though again that you mentioned.
so that, and honestly, I learn stuff every month, and sometimes it's from the speaker. Most of the times it's from, the other members. Um, and over the years, Rick Oppenheimer did a great job, as chair. He asked good questions. I found that the best mentors ask the best and hardest questions.
Yeah.
I was with Jim Schultz yesterday, and I mean, he asked some really great questions, which really, keeps you thinking and helps you, take another perspective,
Hmm.
as to what it is.
Well, and you say a lot about the people, and it comes back to that, right? Like the interview was questions again, right? It sounds like to be a really great leader, you ask really great questions and you're open-minded to that feedback, but then you ask follow-up questions, right? I heard a speaker speak the other day, and they said the person was asked questions, and their response was why. They said again, why?
Yeah.
Why? And I'm like, if this guy says why one more time, I'm gonna go nuts. But it was actually the simple question of why uncovered a significant. I think we all are problem solvers, and we want
Yeah.
to answer the question. That I get, I'm a victim of that. I'm a lesson in learning of listening and not talking as much. But
Yeah.
I'm dumb and young. Apparently, I'm still figuring that out.
Well, you used to, yeah, well, I wouldn't say dumb, but you're still young. Um, yeah, I mean, one of the tenets of lean is five whys, and they believe that after the fifth why, you really get to the root cause.
Mm, I love it. Well, when we work with our clients, we do an intake and we call it the five whys: who, what, where, when, why. And like if we don't have those things answered, we can't effectively help them.
Hmm.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, Dave, we're kind of getting down to the end of our conversation today. I could talk to you for hours, but if you could give your 1987 self one piece of advice, what would it be today?
Make the hard decisions faster.
Ooh, tell me more.
Well, I think too often, I know for me, when you say your people are your biggest asset, you believe in people, and you want to develop people. There's lots of times when there's a decision that needs to be made about around that person, and not not making that decision quickly has significant consequences.
Mm,
And I'd say it's been around people, that have been the most expensive um, decisions that I made, or didn't make soon enough. But
okay.
but even other difficult decisions, um, I think that you have to, have a process that makes sure you get all the input that you should, and then you, most of the time, in your gut.
Yeah.
You just know in your gut
Yeah.
what the right decision is, but then we try and second guess, and we just don't act. Um,
And I think pain comes into a lot of that, right? Like, oh man, when I make this, it's gonna be me, 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 pain
yeah,
for me, me, me.
yeah,
And like, man, that's really a hard thing.
yeah, yeah. And but what really ends up happening is it's usually relief.
You're right. Yeah.
It's usually relief, and somebody comes to you and says, "What took you so long?"
I know. Oh, that was that hurts when you hear that, doesn't it? I'm like, why did you tell me? Well, hey man, they were still employed, I'm still gonna tell you.
Uh-huh. Yeah. That that
Okay.
that 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 is it. Make the hard decisions fast.
I love it. And how about this one? What's one challenge or encouragement you would like to leave our listeners today as we wrap up?
Don't be afraid to fail.
Ooh, I love it.
I think that's where some of the, some of the best learning comes from, putting yourself out there and, try not to make it catastrophic,
Right.
but lots of incremental failures leads to big successes.
Yeah, like stumble and just scrub your knee against the ground. Don't run in front of the truck, I guess is what you're saying.
That's right.
I love it. Dave, you've been awesome. So, everyone, as this brings us to the end of today's chapter of Servant Leadership Library, huge thank to Dave for joining us and providing that leadership. Much like HVAC systems works best when the airflow is clear, the pressure is balanced, and someone's paying attention to the long-term maintenance. So, Dave, your decades of insight from building a company before half our listeners were even born to helping set the standard for an entire industry remind us that great leaders isn't just about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the one who lifts everyone up, even when the temperature gets a little uncomfortable. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss another moment of wisdom, wit, or the occasional dad level pun. And if you really liked it, share with someone who could, need a raise up in leadership thermostat a few degrees. So I'm your host, Nicholas Paulukow from One to One, reminding you that whether it's IT systems or HVAC systems or the human who rely on both, everything looks better when we lead with service first. Until next time, thanks for checking out another volume of Servant Leaders Library. Stay curious, stay courageous, and remember, leadership isn't seasonal. It's always in demand.